All right, so welcome everyone to this Astro Duet. This is the last Astro Duet of the year, and it's a huge celebration we're doing to close the year with two of our most loved and guiding lights in astrology, which are Melanie Reinhart and Darby Costello. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much. How are you?
Oh, are you speaking to us now?
I'm speaking to both of you, yes.
Pleased to be here with you and looking forward to the conversation. I can't imagine what you're going to ask us, and I'm really interested. So,
Nice. Yeah. Melanie, do you want to say something?
Yes, sure. So I've lost you and Darby.
oh, no,
I'm gonna make us become again to the front
Oh, okay.
so you can see us.
So yes, I'm delighted to be here, really. And this is like, well, for Darby and me, this feels like an extension of decades worth of conversation that we've already had. And also during this year, we already had some trios. So Alejo, Darby, and me got together several times and just had chats,
Yeah.
set the world to rights, and so on. So
Yes.
this is lovely.
Yes.
Yes. This is how the idea came up because yeah, Melanie saying is sometimes Darby, Melanie, and I we get together for a little chat, and
On
it's so
Zoom.
precious.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so nice for me. So I thought, why shouldn't we share all of these stories with everyone else? It's so
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
So before we go into this, just a few reminders to everyone who is watching also. This is a free event, of course, but we are very grateful if you can make a donation because this will help us have more money to do more events and more magazines and more conferences and better conferences and all of this. But of course, I know the financial situation is different for everyone. Also, it's Christmas. And I know usually this means a lot of expenses. So if you cannot make a donation, please don't feel bad. If you can make it, it's amazing. But if you cannot make it, don't feel bad. And you can always help just by promoting the event, sharing this. We're going to send the recording link and you can share it with people who might be interested, sharing the work that the association does. These are all ways to support what we're doing. And just to remind you that we do have a date for next year's conference. It's going to be it's going to start on the 29th of August until the 31st of August in Eastwood Hall. This is in Nottingham, very close to where Robin Hood was, and that's why the theme of Robin Hood and Pluto in Aquarius. So hopefully we will all meet there in person. And also to remind you that there's a new magazine coming up from the Astrological Association, which is the Stellar magazine, which is completely free. And if you just go to the webpage, you go to the section of publications, and you will be able to download it or watch it online. And it's intended also, you can use this if you know people who might be interested in astrology, but they don't want to study a course of astrology, but they want to read about it. It's like the articles are kind of friendlier to people who are not astrologers. So it could be helpful for that. Okay, great. So now let's go to this, and we want to know everything. So the idea today, we have Mercury retrograde conjunct the Sun. So it's a moment in which we can, rethink, revisit stories about the past. And I think we are so lucky today because it's so easy to study astrology today and to reach astrological knowledge. So what I was wondering is, how was it for you two, Darby and Melanie, the first time that you found out astrology, what astrology was, because you didn't find it through Instagram and social media?
No.
And what was the experience like? The first time that somebody read your chart, how did you feel? How was it like?
Should I start? Okay. I don't know when it began. I thought it began in 68 or 69. I met it somewhere and then ended up in Boston studying with Isabel Hickey. And she did my chart and said that I should become an astrologer and I should study with her. But since she wasn't teaching until September, I would have to go to someone else ahead of time, Francis Sarkoyan and Louis Acker, whom they were rivals with each other. But she was afraid if I didn't start immediately, I wouldn't end up. So she sent me to her rivals to start. So I started with them and then ended up with her. But I just received an email from somebody I was at university with. I haven't heard from her in, I don't know, 50 years. I graduated in 1966. And she wrote to me and said, Darby, I've just found the chart you did for me when we were at university.
Wow.
And I thought, I discovered it then at this Catholic university? I didn't know that, but apparently I did. So,
Wow.
and I mean, I was just, and I must have lost it again after university. I went to California. It was the 60s, you know, we did all that. And we all were into it. Everyone was into it. But there were about 4 books. We had Dane Rudhyar, Alan Leo, and I can't think, and then eventually Liz's book. When I got down to Africa, her book came out, but that was about it. We had no books. And now you can get it everywhere. But we fell in love with it, and we met each other, those of us who loved it, everywhere. And we just talked and talked and talked and talked. That was my experience in America in the 60s. And Melanie, you were in Zimbabwe.
Yes, I was.
Mm.
So my connection with astrology dates back to 1959.
Wow.
That's true.
Wow.
So what had happened was I, as a child, was just I had had an accident and broken my shoulder, so I was off school a lot, which was fine with me. The local library was at the end of our road, and I still remember. So Rhodesia, as it was back then, was very much an agrarian kind of economy, still is. And so in the entire National Library, there was one shelf about 1 meter wide, labeled psychology and religion and philosophy. So that's the entire national collection, which I would endlessly go there and borrow books and read them. And I found this small book on astrology. And I can still remember taking the book off the shelf, and it was propped up on my plaster cast, and looking at it and turning over the pages and having this very particular sense of recognition. It's like, oh, like meeting somebody that you know, but you're not quite sure where you saw them first, you know? So I read a few pages of the book, and I just knew that there was way more to astrology than was written in this little book. One of my great regrets is I don't remember the title or the author of this book. I remember the title and author of some of the other books that I also read from the shelf, things about theosophy and Buddhism,
I remember
and all kinds of things, you know. And so there was no esoteric milieu and actually literally no bookshops by that time in the town where I lived. And so the next phase was entirely solo and fueled by my Gemini curiosity, okay? So after memorizing all the sun signs from this little book, I simply asked everybody I met, everybody at school and at my parents' business, and I would always ask them what their birthday was. And then I'd be kind of observing them and trying to figure out if or how that tallied with what I'd already read. And this went on for years until I got to Cape Town University. And for my 19th birthday, so that now we're in the late 60s, someone gave me a copy of Dane Rudhyar's book, The Pulse of Life. I still have that very copy.
I do too. I have the one I got then too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I opened it and, of course, read my own sun sign, Gemini, you know, like anybody would do. And what I read so moved me. I mean, this man who I'd never met, I did meet him later, but that's another story. I felt, oh my God, this person knows me better than my own parents ever did, and maybe even better than I ever did.
Yeah.
It was absolutely inspirational. And I just spontaneously made a pledge that I would follow wherever this astrology would lead me. And indeed, that was one of the reasons that I eventually left Africa and came to England. And here's a really bizarre turn of events. I had met a Sufi teacher who had a community in Surrey. And I ended up living there for quite a few years. And this man only turned out to be the then publisher of Dane Rudhyar's books. So there was an entire set of original Rudhyar hardbacks in the community library. And that's basically how I learned astrology. I feasted on Rudhyar. And I was still all the time completely solo. So odd that.
Can I say something about the Rudhyar book? You reminded me of something, because I was playing with astrology like everybody was in the 60s, you know, of the acid heads we were. And one day somebody gave me that book, and I sat in a field in New Hampshire or Vermont, and I read the entire book, and I walked into the house and I burst into tears and said, I have to study this. I have to go to Boston. I have to leave. I have to go. And I was going to go on and get an MA and a PhD and all of that, get married and have children. And I knew that there was nothing I could do. I absolutely had to do that. Isn't that interesting? Yep. And I've forgotten that.
So do you remember what year that was?
It would have been 68, I think. 68.
I think that was the same year that I was given a copy of it.
How interesting. Huh.
And I was at the University of Cape Town then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Melanie,
so
sorry.
In the community, you know, the reading material was deliberately quite restricted because it was like a retreat house, you know. And so I was able to learn astrology inside an entire community of people to observe and watch, with all of their transits and going through all their processes and so forth, which was so revealing. And then also jumping ahead, in 1990, I believe it was, Darby and I ended up working at that very location. We ran for 4 years a summer program.
A week-long group of people came from all over Europe. Yeah.
Yeah, residential. And it was there on my spiritual stamping ground, as it were, in the very place where I had learned all of my astrology, and even up to the level of reading charts and stuff. So that was a wonderful kind of completing of the circle for us.
And can I say one more thing I've just remembered? My sister told me once that my mother died in 1959, and we were young. Our parents died very young. But my sister once reminded me that she used to read us our horoscopes in the local paper. And I've always known my time of birth. All of us knew our time of birth. And we were serious Catholics, you know, and yet she'd read us our horoscope in the local paper, and we all knew what we were. You know, my sister was a Capricorn, I was a Gemini, my mother was a Scorpio, my father was an Aquarius, and she'd read all of them. Strange things in conventional worlds, you know.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Darby, do you remember when you went to Isabel for the first time to have this chart reading? Why you went? Was it just curiosity, or did you have like a specific question? And how you felt, you know, okay, she said you should be an astrologer, but what was your experience of this person reading your chart?
Making me laugh because I'm remembering. I was in California when I realized that I was told the best schools to go to were in Boston. And so I hitchhiked back across America. In those days, you could hitchhike endlessly, and went back to Boston across America, and ended up making a chart with her. And by then, I'd had a lot of people had looked at my chart in California and had said, a lot of the young men I got to know were looking at astrology. And they said, oh, you should be an astrologer. You should be an astrologer. And then I went to Isabel and she said, oh, you should be an astrologer. And I thought, God, does everybody who looks at you say this? Do they say it to everybody? I remember being like, ugh, stop it. It's enough. Because at that time, I just found it interesting, but being an astrologer was inconceivable. It just wasn't until I read Dane Rudhyar's book. So I was a bit like, I wasn't quite sure of her. I went away slightly uncomfortable. And then she said, you must start studying right now. And I thought, ooh, I'm not sure. And then I read Dane Rudhyar's book. And then I went back to Boston and started. So I was slightly uncomfortable around her. And she was quite a character, but she used to have us say prayers at the beginning of our groups. We had our classes in her basement, and she'd put us all together. And the prayer had to do with the fact, listen to this, that in Atlantis, we had screwed up. And this time it was going to be just as challenging, and we mustn't screw up. We must stay absolutely responsible to making sure that the people we see know that we mustn't destroy ourselves. Because in Atlantis, it was our fault. We should have known, and we should have stopped it from happening. It was reincarnational astrology she was teaching.
Wow.
Yeah, very powerful.
And Melanie, do you remember your first? Have you ever had your chart read by an astrologer?
Oh, yes, yes. All the way along, really, I've really enjoyed having colleagues that I can turn to and do kind of semi-formal work with my horoscope and so forth. But my very first reading that I had with anybody is a somewhat different story. I was invited to participate in a particular group. And in this group, there was a focus on astrology. What I hadn't realized was that being invited to the group meant that you would show your chart and everybody would read it. Okay. And so what happened was the person leading the group, who I will not name, he made a mistake when he transposed my data, because I was born in the Southern Hemisphere. And in the calculation, well, we were all hand calculating in those days.
Yeah, it's true. You were all hand calculating.
We were, yeah, absolutely, for years and years.
And so he'd forgotten to do the 12-hour difference thing for a Southern Hemisphere chart. And anyway, he put up my chart on the board and began interpreting it. And I saw, to my horror, the chart was wrong. And I didn't really know these people. And I was kind of like the rabbit in the headlights. I thought, oh God, should I just go along with this, or should I say something? Oh God. And in the end, I did say something rather weedy, like, my chart is different than what's on the board. And so that already ruffled the leader. So we had a short discussion, and I was so rabbit in the headlights, I couldn't figure out how on earth he'd got the wrong chart. I didn't think about the 12-hour thing until later. And so he just insisted on reading the chart that he had drawn up, because, hey, he was like God, And it was absolutely horrible. I felt frozen with upset and horror and confusion, because I couldn't put my finger on how he'd got to this mistake. And he said a lot of things, wow, which on reflection, even now, I'm thinking, wow, that was such a powerful lesson of what you never do in a reading. You tell people about themselves as if they're looking at a blueprint of who you are, that they know and you don't, and you better conform. I found it absolutely traumatizing. And afterwards, I just remember sitting, I was so upset. And I also had this rush of gratitude. I thought, wow, I was given a really short, sharp lesson in several things that I hope I would never do in a reading, because I've been on the end of the impact that it can have when it's mismanaged, And so I ended up in a place of gratitude, but it was an experience. And I made sure that could never be repeated, in the sense of being really careful who I would let loose on my chart, you know. So a very different experience.
Yeah, very interesting. Very powerful, I think. And I don't know if you know, Darby, if you remember, somebody's asking if you remember which transits were taking place when you started these studies in astrology.
Oh gosh, no, I can look it up while I'm talking, and I'll tell you later because I've got my. But I do remember one thing. After I left, I read a book. After I studied astrology, I worked at MIT in the psychiatry department, and I was studying astrology at the same time. And there were 13 psychiatrists at MIT. And in the end, they gave me a party that lasted 7 hours long. It was wonderful. And they knew I was studying astrology, but this is the 60s, isn't it? And MIT is like Harvard and, you know, Oxford. It's a bit, but they were fine that I was studying astrology. And I was getting their dates of birth and telling them things the whole time. And when I decided to, I read a book called Stranger in a Strange Land. And I remember thinking, I'm a stranger in my own land. I'd rather be a stranger in a strange land. So I'm going somewhere. I'm going to leave this country and go somewhere. And I went to Isabel for a chart. This is after I'd finished studying with her. And she said, no, don't go now. If you go anywhere, you won't come back for years and years because your progressed sun is on Saturn. And it's true. I went to Europe. I ended up in Africa. I spent 12 years there, and I've spent 40 years here. And the only time I go back to America is to lecture. So she was right. I remember that, but I don't remember the aspects that started me studying, but I'll look and see while you're speaking.
Yeah, it's okay.
Now.
It's curiosity.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder
The
what
other thing that, sorry, Melanie, yes, what do you want to add? Yes.
I'd have to look it up, but I think that the year where I discovered Rudhyar, which sounds like it was the same year that Darby also discovered Rudhyar. I think that Neptune was just entering Sagittarius around that time. And so it was opposite my sun.
Ah.
Is that
and
right?
I'll have to look. I'll look in a minute, but I've just done the chart up for it, and I remembered. I started studying when my progressed moon was on my Mercury in the 9th house.
Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember taking the bus endlessly. Before I started living in Boston and was working at MIT, I was taking the bus every week. And I was aware, somebody made me aware of the progressed moon very early. And I was aware that Mercury and the moon were being activated. And I thought, I'm sure that's good. I don't know what it means, but I'm sure it's good. And so you're looking at 59, Melanie. Are you?
Yeah, that was when I found that first astrology book.
Oh, but that wasn't when you found Rudhyar. Rudhyar was
no, that was quite a number of years later when I was at UCT.
Yeah. We think that might have been.
But that first connection, I think Uranus was on my Saturn.
So Neptune, yes, it was changing to Sagittarius around 68, 69, yeah.
Ah, yes, so that was finding Rudhyar.
Nice, very
interesting. That sounds like it could be a nice movie title, Finding Rudhyar.
Yes.
It should be a documentary.
Yes.
The thing is, if I read Rudhyar now, I can't understand a word he's saying. But in those days, everything he said, I just took in so completely.
Absolutely.
But now I sort of lose the will to live if I read 2 pages. It's just, it was so
funny you say that, because I went through a similar thing, having just absorbed everything I could get my hands on and immersed.
Yeah.
Then as time went on, I couldn't make head or tail of it.
Yeah.
What's this?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But then that delicious experience of being immersed, that came back.
Yes.
But now I've found over time that I kind of move in and out of it.
Yeah.
You know, that it disappears or I disappear or something.
Yeah.
And then I reconnect and the whole kind of flood of wonder comes back, you know.
Yeah, the flood of wonder. It's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
And Melanie, you said you met Rudhyar in person. Have you met him also, Darby?
No. I went to Africa as soon as I left America, and I didn't know. And I was in California too, but I never met him.
Mm. And you, Melanie, how was it? How was your experience? How was he like in like, because we know his books, but like in person, how
Yeah.
was he like?
So the first time I met him was in the 1970s. And I went with this Sufi teacher I mentioned. I went with him to a business meeting to do with the books that my teacher was publishing. And so that was very nice. And he invited us for dinner at his home, and we talked astrology to some extent, but most of the meeting I wasn't really involved with, but we did talk astrology. And he gave me a book or two, which was a real treasure. Then I met him again in 1975 in New York. He was doing a weekend seminar at an astrology center. I think it was just called the Astrology Center. I'm not sure. But anyway, the seminar was absolutely marvelous, a whole weekend. And towards the end, well, at the end of the webinar, wasn't a webinar. This was before the internet. The seminar. I just went up to him to thank him and so on and so forth. And it was at that point he said, "You should be working professionally."
Wow.
And that for me was the kind of shove.
Yeah.
That where I would it's a whole change of mindset when you go professional,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I'd read hundreds of charts because of living in the community.
Yeah.
But I didn't go professional until that prompt. So that was October 1975. And I found him very warm and wonderful and interesting.
Wow.
But he didn't suffer fools gladly. I vividly remember that in the course of the seminar, one student asked a question, and Rudhyar kind of clapped his hand to his head and said, "Oh my God, I've been trying to explain that for 40 years. Why don't you read my books?" That's almost verbatim quote, and everybody just kind of froze. And I felt very sorry for the student because he was really fierce, but he was very straight talking and also very kindly, and it was wonderful.
The thing about, may I say, you reminded me, like, I did charts for everybody. And I still, when people talk about people, I say, what's their date of birth? And they say, oh, I don't know. And I think, how do you talk to someone for 5 minutes without getting their date of birth? I don't get it. Anyway, I remember being very, doing charts. And I went down to Cape Town and I met a woman who was an old woman for me at that time. She'd been doing charts all her life. And we had a wonderful conversation. And at the end of it, she said, when you go back to Johannesburg, start charging. And I said, oh, no, I was still a hippie somewhere in my head. And she said, I promise you, if you start charging in 5 years, you will have learned more than I have in 50 years. And I said, why? And she said, I don't know. I just know the sense of responsibility it gives you. So listen to this. This is the beginning of 73. So I go back to Joburg and I do the chart for somebody who comes to me. And he's a wonderful artist. And at the end of it, he says, how much do you charge? He's very tall, very grand. And I say, oh, I don't. And he said, he hands me something like 10 Rand, which is about 20p now. And he hands me 10 Rand and he says, you do from now. And from that moment, January of 1973, I have made my living only by doing charts.
Wow.
From that moment. And somebody else who was coming to me regularly, and she said, are you charging it? I said, yes. She said, thank God. And I said, why? She said, money is the cheapest way to pay for anything. If you don't charge someone, they have to give you something and they have to think what they're going to give you and they owe you something. If you charge money, and today, some of my very best friends will phone me and say, Darby, I want you to do my chart, but do it as her. And what they mean is do it as the professional, and they pay me, and they insist on paying me. And occasionally, if they're very close, I say, no, you take me to a fancy restaurant and spend a lot of the money that way. But otherwise, from that moment, and she said, in 5 years, you'll learn more than I have in 50. And I understand why, because you do take a responsibility when you're charging that changes the way you see. Interesting, isn't it?
What would you say? Because as a teacher, I see a lot that when people study astrology, some people struggle to decide when they should start charging.
Yeah. Well, we were both given clues, weren't we? We were both told by
Yes,
wiser
we're kind of
people.
instructed.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a moment when it becomes, it's enough now. You've got to start now.
Yeah.
But I think you have to wait for the signal that tells you.
Yes, yes, I agree.
Yeah.
And I've had, down the years, many conversations with many students on this very same question. And I kind of find myself saying, if you're patient and you wait, but continue to dedicate yourself to the art, you will get a sign.
Yeah.
You'll have a dream, or you'll just wake up one morning and say, oh, okay, from now,
Yeah.
I'm going to charge money.
Or
And
somebody who comes to you will give you money and say, that's it, I'm giving you money. And that's
exactly.
the clue. Yeah.
That also applies to the vexed question of how much
Yeah.
charge. The only response I ever have to that is really, you have to charge what's comfortable for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then that can vary wildly.
Yeah.
There are lots of astrologers out there in the new busy out there world. And like, I just laugh, I've been doing it 10 years and I only charge 500 pounds for it. And I think, oh my God, how do I do it? I mean, I've gone like up 5 pounds. I think I started with 10 rand and I've gone up 5 pounds, and I pay what I have to live. That's how much I charge, just a little bit. And I'll go up every few years, just a bit, somehow. And just how much I have to live, not to get money from it, but for it to pay for the life that I'm living so I can be this astrologer.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree 100% with that.
Yeah.
Because some people feel guilty about charging. They feel like it's a spiritual thing. We shouldn't charge.
Well, that's why it took so long to do it. And that's why that friend of mine said, money's the cheapest way to pay for anything.
Yeah.
And, it's very simple. And now I'm completely fine with it, but I've been charging, I don't know, since 1973. It's quite a long time. It took me years to get used to it, but it's just a very simple thing. And if you're not charging, a ridiculous amount of money, it's fine. It's so simple, it's, yeah.
Yeah, I want to read a little bit the things that are being written in the chat, because I got taken by the conversation. Annette is saying, because you were talking about the progress sun going on Saturn. So Annette is sharing that her daughter is having her progress sun on Saturn, and she's about to give birth in March. So
I think it's really interesting. I have a different, Saturn is it's a very powerful planet. But when you do something on Saturn, it's a very profound commitment that you have.
Yeah.
You enter a space of very profound commitment. And what I've noticed, I have lots of planets in Gemini. So every time Saturn either squares, opposes, squares, or conjuncts, it does it for a whole year, And every time that happens, every 7 years or so, I'm very aware of Saturn the whole year. And I use it to do things as I keep saying, how do I do it now? How do I do it properly? Whatever it is, how do I do it properly? And over time, when it comes like that, it teaches you how to do things properly if you listen to it. I always think of Saturn and Jupiter as the two uncles. One sits on one shoulder and the other sits on the other shoulder. And you need to be in good relationship to both of them, not one more than the other or the other more than one. So starting with Saturn, she's taking on a profound commitment to her life now. Yeah.
And then Scott is asking Melanie if your Sufi teacher exposed you to any Sufi astrology.
The short answer there is no.
Mm.
Mm.
I'm on my way to some of that later.
But you got that later to Sufi astrology.
Well, to the extent that there were some very famous Sufi astronomers way back who really were responsible for naming a lot of the stars whose names we still use those names.
Yeah.
But certainly in terms of the kind of metaphysical and spiritual background against which one would read charts, I certainly really got a lot from that teacher, including the way of learning. Because, you know, up to the time I was in the community and even beyond, I was completely solo in my journey with astrology. And it was only when my Saturn return was approaching and that I knew that if I wanted to be part of the astrological community, which I did, I felt that was really important in all sorts of ways, that I needed to, you know, take a course. I also knew that if I didn't do a structured course, there was lots of things I never would have bothered with, to be honest. And so it was then that I joined the Faculty of Astrological Studies, went through their whole program. So I like to say that I did it all backwards, you know, because I was already working professionally and then started all the formal studies. I did lots and lots of study myself, but not with a formal course. So talking of Mercury retrograde, my own Mercury is retrograde. So I always say, well, that's how come I did it backwards. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
And I would say when somebody starts, you know, if they're uncomfortable about charging, but they somehow think they should, charge less than you feel is right. And then you can put it up when you're comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, it'll feel okay if you charge just a bit less than you think you'd like to. And then you're not connecting too much doing charts with money in a negative way, I think. I don't know, something like that.
I have a friend who says that if you feel too tired after a session, it's because you didn't charge enough. So the energy was not balanced.
Oh, interesting.
I think if you feel tired, it's because you got a victim type. And they get into draining you. Fortunately, I don't get many people like that.
Yeah. Then they're saying here, Melanie and Darby, try that small booklet Rudhyar did on the planetary nodes. It has seduced many a veteran astrologer. Do you know it?
Yes, I do.
I've probably got it. I think I've got all his books, but I'm not sure which one it is, but I'll look afterwards. Yeah, because
then Francis from UK is sharing that in 1977 got involved in astrology in a local bookshop, having a nice chat with the owner. No one else was there. I felt obliged to buy something because of this chat, and I bought Jeff Mayo's astrology book, and now that was the spark that lit the fire.
Yes, the spark that lit the fire. Yeah, we all have that, don't we? Yeah.
I do remember. Sorry. I remember when I first came over to London from Africa, and I discovered Watkins' bookstore. It was like I thought I had died and gone to heaven browsing in that bookstore. It was just extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that too. Yeah.
When did you two meet?
Now, do we have this? I have a memory. I'm not sure it'll be the same as yours.
Interesting. Well, I believe it was 1985 or 6.
Yeah.
And as I recall, it was our mutual hairdresser who first made us each aware of each other's presence.
And he's now in New Zealand, isn't he?
That's right. He came from there. And that was followed up. What I recall is that I think that was really early 1986.
Yeah, maybe.
Because every year when I lived in London, I would go to the festival hall to hear the Bach choir.
That's what I remember too. That's when we met
Yes.
for the first time. And I didn't
Exactly.
remember, I kept thinking, is this true? I remember
No.
meeting you at a concert.
Exactly.
Ah,
So
you had a lovely skirt on, I remember that.
Okay. I used to round up, you know, a bunch of friends, and we'd all go down to the festival hall
Yeah.
for Easter Sunday concert. It was a whole institution in London. So I used to just round up people, and, you know, if you were blessed with good weather, the custom was you would take a picnic lunch and you'd eat outside, you know, by the Thames and all that. And so I invited Darby and her partner to come to the concert with me that year, which she did. So we met actually in the festival hall. I still remember the moment.
And then as Melanie was saying, we had an office that we met in. And the office was a cafe in West Hampstead.
Yeah.
And we'd go to the cafe and drink endless cups of coffee and talk astrology every week for
Yes.
years and years until we decided to teach together and gather a group of people. And I came from Africa. The reason I chose to come to this country from Africa after being there for 12 years was that I desperately wanted an astrological community. And I knew there must be one somewhere in the Northern Hemisphere. And I didn't want to go to America. So I thought, Stephen and I thought, where can we go? And in the end, we decided to come here. And I thought there was got to be an astrological community somehow. And slowly over time, I began to meet people. And there was an astrological community. It was magical, having doing charts for 12 years and being the only astrologer, except for this old woman down in Cape Town and one rather not very pleasant astrologer in Joburg who we didn't get on very much. And other than that, nobody else knew it. Everyone who talked astrology were people who were my friends, and I made them learn to talk it. But I never met another astrologer except for that woman down there. And up here, there was a whole world of people. It was magical.
Yeah. So that's another real similarity, actually.
Yes.
And didn't we once figure out that the year that you went to Africa was the year that I left and came to London?
Yeah, I went to Africa in 71.
Yeah. And I left Africa and came to London in 1971.
That's right. And then I came here in 83. Yeah. Yeah. And then I found out there was an international community. Oh, the bliss of it, you know, that you could go to any country and you could meet other astrologers. You could sit in rooms and everybody was talking this language. And after sort of 15, 20 years or 15 years, however long it was, of being the one who had to teach everyone to talk it, you know, it was just magical. Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah.
And when you decided to start teaching together, how did this idea came up? What did you teach? What did you start teaching? And like, what were you doing? Did you fund the school or?
So how it came about was that in the Sufi community that I mentioned already, typically they would have a long summer program lasting 3 months through the summer with different things, and people could come and go and all that. And there was one year, in fact, after the main focalizer person died, they were trying to plan the summer school for the future without him. And I remember it was in a big meeting in the main room called the barn. It literally was a barn, huge room. And so we were just working on scheduling. And this week opened up with nothing in it and nobody wanted to take it and so forth. And I put my hand up and said, I'll take it, thinking I'll do something during that week. And of course, pretty immediately, Darby came to mind. And so I told her what had happened. And did we go down to Four Winds, it was called? Did we go down to Four Winds and see the place beforehand? I think maybe yes.
Maybe we did. Yeah.
Don't remember that bit. But anyway, that's how it came about.
Yeah.
It's like there was this week that opened up. that now I can look back and say, I think that was meant for us.
But also, we'd both been lecturing in Zurich. I mean, I've been lecturing in Zurich and in Germany, in
Yes,
France, various places. So we just told everyone. How did we do it? We didn't have the internet then. We must have written them letters or something, or phoned them
yeah.
up.
I mean, had a little mailing list in a little box
Yeah.
and
sent
made
it
a
out.
little thing and photocopied it and just sent it by post to not
Wow.
even that many people.
Yeah.
And then we had a full group every year.
Every year. And it was a whole week in this barn. And we'd make up things to play with. We'd sit around
Yeah.
and say, why don't we have everybody dress as their sun signs? Or why
Yeah.
don't we have everybody be their partner's moon sign? And we just play and play.
Yeah.
We did it, I think, for about 4 years or so.
We did. It was 4 years.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, later people came to call that sort of thing astro-drama.
That's what I was just saying. We had games that we played, like, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it was more using the elements of play,
Yeah.
and ritual and performance.
Yeah.
So it wasn't so much astro-drama in the sense that it came to mean quite deep psychological work.
Yeah.
So although
It was,
indeed that
yeah.
happened, but that wasn't the focus, really.
Yeah.
Wasn't our main orientation.
And everyone seemed to get on. There
I
were
know.
nobody ever fought with anyone. Nobody.
No.
And the age range was amazing. Like the youngest was probably about 20. And
Yes.
I'm thinking Wolfgang was probably the oldest. And he was.
No, Eliza.
Oh, Eliza, of course, she was definitely the oldest. That's right. She was born in
Absolutely.
1920. But Wolfgang was a banker from Switzerland with generations of bankers behind him. And his wife read about this in somebody's letter, and she said, you must go over there. And he said, what? Be with a bunch of old English hippies? No way. And she said, yes, you must. You must go. She had Sun and Pisces in the 8th house, I still remember. And you must go over there. You will find it wonderful. You will enjoy it. Because he was studying astrology in a very Zurich banker kind of way with his books and everything. And he came over and we fell in love with him and he fell in love with us. And we stayed friends all his life until he died.
Yeah.
And he used to come over and he couldn't believe how much he liked this group of people. You know,
Yes.
somehow he was shocked.
And it was so sweet because his wife actually phoned me up. She was arranging some summer activities for her much beloved husband, yeah? And she phoned me up, I think to check me out and see if I was completely crazy or not, you know, because I guess she'd seen the flyer or something and she phoned me up. What a completely lovely woman.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. So
And
nice.
she actually gave me a set of crystal stars very shortly before she sadly died.
Yeah.
And they still hang in my kitchen.
Oh,
So it's like every time I go in there, I'm reminded of her wonderful earthiness and groundedness and generosity too.
yeah.
You know?
Yes.
Have you ever, during your professional years, have you ever questioned astrology, like had a crisis of faith in astrology? Or nowadays, sometimes some students, they get a little bit, we have so many different house systems, and some astrologers use the dignities, some astrologers use the trans-Saturnian planets, some don't, some people use the center, some don't. And sometimes the students get kind of in a crisis with all of these possibilities. Did this ever happen to you? Or
I don't think I have. I don't think I have. I get crazy with all the stuff you have to figure out, like the house systems and stuff. But I think it's hard not to see. It's like there's a window and it's a certain color and you see through that window every day. So it's not, there's no, it's not even, how do I say? I can't help navigating by the stars. So how could I possibly think I can't navigate by the stars? I can do it badly. You know, I can make a mistake. I'm never sure that I'm good enough ever. And I mean, young people often say to me, oh, but I don't have confidence. I'm not sure I can do charts. I've never had confidence. When I'm in it, I'm doing it utterly. And when I'm out of it, I'm really grateful other people think I'm good enough. You know, it's too great to be good enough. You can never be good enough. But that you would doubt that you can, that the stars are there to navigate by, I wouldn't know how to go there to even play with that somehow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think for me, similar but also different. I never lost faith, as it were, because I guess, you know, having connected in with it when I was so young, it was part of my life from a really young age. I went through a period of disillusionment about how it was being used, and pulled back quite a lot, but never stopped my own feeling, as Darby so eloquently described, of, you know, navigating my own life through astrology, and having the privilege of seeing how it can also help others navigate their lives. So I never got skeptical or lost faith in that, but I did feel that there were directions of usage that developed that I did not feel in sync with, and so
definitely.
I
agree.
didn't want to contribute to any kind of polarization, so I basically didn't enter any polarizations, but just basically kept my mouth shut and carried on with my work.
Yeah, me too.
You know.
Yeah. Very nice. Wow, fantastic. And we have a few more minutes. Is there something, you know, for us it's so inspiring to hear you both. Is there something that you would like to, I don't know, tell us, to encourage us to become better astrologers? Like a piece of advice or...
Wow.
Wow.
Can I don't know if this is the right thing to say, but it's the thing that came up. So let me try. It's something I said when I was talking to the faculty last year on that open day. I have the sense that when I step into the chart, when the client is in front of me or here, and I say, okay, and I pick up the recorder and I turn it on and I start speaking, I'm stepping into the role of the ancient priestess. And the whole time I'm doing it, I am there, utterly there. Nothing distracts me. I'm so grateful. I'm there with that person in their universe, looking through the chart to be able to help them navigate whatever they're dealing with. And then when I step out of it, I go back to being the ordinary jerk like everybody else. I keep saying it that way. It's like, to recognize that when you step in, you're stepping into a sacred space and you have to be there in that sacred space, but never to identify with it the rest of the time. Because when you step out of it, I say I become the ordinary tormented basket case that I am normally. And each of us has an ordinariness. We're ordinary, like everybody. We're jerks, we're stupid, we're dumb, we're ordinary, except when we step in, and everything that you can do to keep that sacred space sacred. And then to know when you're in it and when you're not. It seems to me, it keeps you sane. You know, you don't lose your perspective on who you are or what it is, if I can put it that way. That's a way of saying it.
Ah, beautiful.
Yeah.
So I 100% agree with what Darby's saying. And I do know that some people find it useful before a reading, let's say, would start, or before a class would start, to say a little prayer
Yeah, I always do.
or have a little moment of meditation.
Yeah.
And what I always found useful was to work at creating a little prayer that really said what I wanted to say or request or ask for.
Yeah.
So to make it, my words, it's like
Yeah,
I'm
that's it.
speaking or requesting from, let's say, the presiding deities of
yeah.
astrology, if they could please help
Yeah.
or whatever, you know.
Mm. Mm.
And the other thing, and I know probably everybody on this call already does this to some extent or other, is, really live with it and feel free to take absolute delight when you notice little things in life that happen, and then you rush to the ephemeris to see if you can tally it up.
Yeah.
Some people would think that was completely mad, you know.
But also to be constantly aware that you're about to learn something new. I mean,
Yes.
You never ever learn enough. There's always more.
Yeah.
Like somebody says, "What about Jupiter?" And I think, Jupiter. What about Jupiter? God, because you never stop learning something new, and you never know it all ever with this wonderful art of ours.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You're always on a discovery course, always. And it's very satisfying. As long as you live, you'll be fascinated by that aspect that's happening, and how are you going to see it, and look what it's doing, and oh no, I didn't think of that. Oh, it's a very rich art that we have, the art of navigating.
Nice. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Before we say goodbye, let's go back to the other view so we can all see each other. There we are. Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
I've just thought of something.
Yes.
You know, the Faculty of Astrological Studies published a marvelous book called The Journey in Astrology, Journey with Astrology,
Through
something
astrology.
like that. Yes, Journey Through Astrology. And I
Yes.
think it's 10 or 12 astrologers, each of them,
Yeah.
telling stories about how they connected with astrology.
Yeah.
And it was both Darby and I were invited to write pieces for the book, which we both did.
And they're short, they're not long.
Yeah. So, I don't know how many thousand words, but they're short. But I still remember how utterly thrilled I was when the book came out. So there was a whole load of astrological colleagues, right? And I realized, God, I didn't know their background story. And it was such a thrill to find out how different people connected and their journey and how it went. I remember I loved every page of the book. But that just came to mind.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this. Yes. And thank you also for everybody who came and for the people who are going to watch this later. And I apologize. I know there were more things in the chat and more questions and comments, but okay. Now,
and thank you, Alejo. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for the and thanks to everybody for coming to listen to us.
Yeah. It's lovely seeing everyone. I love it.
Yeah.
Everywhere, all over the world. Yeah.
the chat.
So all of you have a good end of the year. We're at the end of this year. My God, how did we get here? And we've got one more before it goes into the new era in 26. Anyway, one more year of this kind of between the worlds kind of. Oh,
yes. Yes.
Yeah. So take care, everyone, and be very good fortune with serving others and navigating yourself somehow through the years with enough joy and enough beauty to go on with.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.